Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. On today's edition of Tell Me More Tuesday, we're going to talk about a maritime topic that is related to our digital topic and have a special guest to talk about that digital topic as well. The maritime topic is bills of lading, what they are, and how they function. In preparation for today's discussion, I found a great source on the Wikipedia's page and also, believe it or not, consulted some notebooks from when I took classes in export-import and the ASBA Charter Party class when I was back at Maritime. Although much of it has changed and much of the way we have done things have changed, the basic concept of bills of lading and how they relate to charter parties really haven't. Our digital topic today is blockchain, and I'll have Darren Shelton of Fuel Trust. He's a CPO and co-founder, and he's going to talk about blockchains and how they relate to bills of lading. First, let's talk about bills of lading, or more simply put, BLs. Firstly, they've been around forever, and the general function, as I noted before, really hasn't changed. They have three purposes, and keep in mind, they always must be transferable. 1, they're a receipt of goods. 2, they're evidence that you have a contract of carriage. And 3, you have a document of title for the goods. Basically, this hasn't changed since I was in school and before that. The main agreement, just keep in mind, and again, if you want to explore this with lawyer friends or you're more in the business, you may hear a few different governing agreements for bills of lading. They are the Hague-Visby rules, the Hamburg rules, and the Rotterdam rules, as well as something called the Carriage of Goods at Sea Act, or COGSA. Let's break down a little bit of each purpose, and we're going to start with as a receipt of cargo. This is the principal use of the bills of lading, and it's as a receipt issued by the carrier once the goods have been loaded onto the vessel. This receipt can be used as a proof of shipment for customs and insurance, and also as commercial proof of completing a contractual obligation. There's basically 3 different types. A clean bill is exactly what it sounds like. What you shipped and what is agreed matches up, so typically that's called a clean bill. A dirty bill, or sometimes people call this a claused bill of lading, will be issued if the goods to be shipped differed in quality or quantity from the contractual description. The buyer's bank is entitled to reject the dirty bill of lading, but will often accept it if you have a reduction in price or more favorable terms. For example, let's say the cargo's leaking, the package could be damaged, or you got short-loaded. Those are all sorts of ways that you can have a dirty bill of lading. The final one, and this is something more for container ships, and when you hear the name, you understand why, said to contain. If the cargo cannot be effectively examined, think about container ships, and I have a container full of glassware. You have no idea to see if that glassware is damaged or not, but you write, said to contain glassware. The second one is as evidence of the contract of carriage. The bill of lading from the carrier to the shipper can be used as evidence of the contract of carriage by the fact that the carrier has received the goods, and upon receipt, the carrier would deliver the goods. In this case, the bill of lading would be used as that evidence. And finally, as a title. This is very particular, focused on the buyer. When the buyer is entitled to receive the goods from the carrier, the bill of lading, in this case, performs as a document of title for the goods. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between the charter party and the bills of lading. Keep in mind the charter party is the contract governing the relationship between the ship owner and the charterer. The bill of lading governs the relationship between the shipper and the carrier. Sometimes if you're dealing with, let's say, going back to a container of glassware, the shipper or the exporter has a small amount of cargo, and they're not entering into a charter party with let's say Maersk or MSC. They will they'll have a BL agreement with a carrier that'll then enter into the charter party with the owner. So they'll use a bill of lading to substitute for that. However, let's take the case of loading a entire ship full of cement. The exporter will have to then enter into a charter party and also have agreements for bills of lading. So it just kind of depends on all of this. Basically the size and the type of cargo. My own experience with BLs, I actually have 2 pretty big ones. A couple of years ago, I live here in New England, and I had an indoor fuel tank. I came out one day to my garage where it is, and I noticed I noticed a smell, a fuel smell, and my fuel tank was leaking. It leaked about a tablespoon. So I called my my furnace people. They said, no, you got to get that thing pumped out. And when it came, the company came to pump it out, they actually issued me a bill of lading that they took receipt of this fuel oil and they were in possession of it, which when you think about, fuel oil driving around any state and how it gets disposed, that is part of an important part of the process. Is now I said, no, these people who we contracted, it was like a cleanup company, took possession of X amount of gallons of my fuel oil, and they disposed of it. And then I no longer had, let's say, some sort of ecological issue. It was all done with the state laws by a state, licensed company. But think about it. I actually got issued a bill of lading. The second really interesting thing, years ago when I was a broker, we had a situation where a charter I was represented was in bankruptcy protection here in the United States. A ship owner wouldn't release the bills, wouldn't release the cargo until they actually had possession of the bills of lading. And what you'll see now is there's electronic bills of lading, which is the reason why electronic bills of lading or letters of indemnity that says that, yes, everything matches up okay. Those are all contained in the charter party. But the ship owner wanted that proof, and it took a few days to get it after the ship arrived at the discharge port, and it caused some delays. Really interesting to see how that all played out in real time. One of the other things that happens is a lot of times is that they will cargoes will get discharged without the actual bills of lading, but again, a letter of indemnity that says that yes, everything is matched up, and you'll eventually get your bills of lading. This happens pretty often in the petroleum trade, especially quick turnaround of voyages. Next up, Darren's going to talk a little bit about blockchain. And he's going to hopefully get into how this is being used today in the maritime space.
So blockchain is a ledger of business transactions that is decentralized, meaning it's shared, as opposed to a centralized ledger where a single authority, such as your bank, manages all the bookkeeping. Now, like any other ledger, a blockchain can track anything, whether tangible, so house, car, cash, art, land, or intangible, so IP, patents, copyright, stuff like that. So virtually anything of value can be traced on a blockchain in a way that is immutable and cryptographically secure, which means less risk and cost for all involved compared to a centralized ledger where any mistake, whether accidental or deliberate, makes all the users very vulnerable. Today, blockchain has been most visibly seen in the cryptocurrency markets, but increasingly large enterprise companies are using smart contract systems for applications of tracing data through life cycles like crude oil from well to wake, or a healthcare record shared between the patient, hospital, and insurer.
And just to build on that, Darren, thank you very much for that explanation. I think a lot of people look at blockchain and they get a little nervous, but basically what you're saying is just a way to control information onto who gets it and when. Talk a little bit about what you know is happening a little bit directly in our space, in the maritime space. You mentioned the crude oil. I know your company's involved in something, but what else do you know that's going on with blockchain today that directly impacts the maritime space?
So if you went back a couple of years ago, the first blockchain maritime applications were TradeLens that was Maersk and IBM working together. You had VACT, V-A-K-T, which was some of the big banks and traders that were trying to do post-trade finance settlements. You've had a few more today. You've got some apps where people are doing more traceability. Obviously, things like a bill of lading are very easily traced in a blockchain, especially when there are multiple parties. So think parcel chemical tanker type deals where one ship's got 60 bill of ladings on it, or even dry bulk, where one massive parcel of grain may be going in small multi-ton units to different facilities in the country. So there's a lot more that's going to move that way. However, many people will never know it.
And I think that, talking to some other folks here, that's one of the things that it may just happen, and as long as it makes people's jobs easier, they may not care exactly what the function is. And of course, one of the things that you alluded to in the beginning with well to wake is what you guys are doing with your own blockchain application, and that is fuel quality, which is a huge issue. And you and I have talked about this at length. Is imagine if you could have traced where molecules have come from when you've had bunker contamination issues, you'd be able to get to the root cause. Yes, you can figure out who's responsible, then also what the root cause is so that problem doesn't happen again. Blockchain could help solve that problem.
Yeah, I would just throw in this phrase that I like to use, and it's not unique to me, a single source of a shared truth. So the ability to have a single source of a shared truth amongst different stakeholders. So in the maritime industry, a single source of a shared truth between a refiner, blender, supplier, ship owner, or a charterer who may be then moving that product and trading it to someone else who's then going to subdivide it amongst a few others. That's where the beauty of a blockchain comes in, where you can take out the he said, she said, expedite the cost of capital because transactions can move faster. I think that's where we're going to see a lot of innovation.
Well, Darren, I think you're absolutely right. I also think, and we can go on and on about this in the not only in the fuel quality, but then of course in emissions and emissions control. We could talk a lot about this, as well as what the footprint will look like. You can have a truer version of that, but I think that's for another day. In the meantime, thank you for coming on and giving us a little primer on what is blockchain and how it's used in maritime. Thanks for coming on today, Darren.
Thanks, Chris.